Service Offerings and Agreements. Module 1, Lesson 1. SOA and the Service Lifecycle. Welcome to Lesson 1. In this lesson, we'll study the context of the SOA processes in the service lifecycle, the reliance of SOA processes on a service strategy, and an overview of strategy management for IT services. Let's start with a quick recap of the service lifecycle. You can see the lifecycle in the diagram on screen now, and we're going to review each element at a high level. In the center of the diagram is service strategy. In the service strategy stage of the lifecycle, the service provider develops a deep understanding of the business and its objectives. It uses that understanding to answer questions such as, what business outcomes must we support? What services should we offer? How should we develop our capabilities? Service strategy makes all the high-level decisions that influence everything we do within service management. It sets policies and objectives for the rest of the life cycle. It makes decisions about services, what new services to offer, and which existing services to enhance or retire. And it decides how to develop service management capabilities. It might recognize, for example, that service transition capabilities are particularly important for an organization and develop policies that enhance those capabilities. Next in the life cycle is service design. Although service strategy has set the core policies, it is service design that then creates blueprints for services to deliver the policies. This life cycle phase ensures that services work individually, as well as within the environment they will eventually be deployed into. If the design is poor, management further on in the life cycle will be much more difficult. For example, a poorly designed service could cause more calls to the service desk, or generate the need for more costly day-to-day support. The third life cycle stage is service transition. Service transition is responsible for seamlessly and smoothly deploying new or changed services into the live environment. Service transition also looks to protect the live environment and ensure that the new or changed service works correctly from day one. Vital knowledge transfer to service operation is also carried out here. The final stage in that middle layer is service operation. Service operation encompasses all the routine activities that are necessary to keep live services up and running. Many of these activities relate to processes that first appear in other stages of the life cycle. For example, the collection of workload and performance metrics for capacity management. Service operation is where strategies are realized. It's where the services deliver value to the business, but it's also where deficiencies in strategy, design, and transition will be encountered. It's fair to say that service operation is the beneficiary or victim of everything that happens upstream. Wrapped around the edge of the diagram is continual service improvement. Continual service improvement interfaces with every other stage of the life cycle and is responsible for making sure that we are always improving. Continual service improvement looks for improvements to services and service management processes across the service lifecycle. They will work to understand where quality improvements can be made through efficiencies, more effective use of existing resources, and the reduction of the effects of constraints. Okay, we've reviewed the service lifecycle. Now let's look at strategy management for IT services. The starting point of the process is to develop a deep understanding of the business, its objectives, its plans and strategies, and its challenges. The process then develops a strategy that defines how the service provider will enable the organization to achieve its objectives. The strategy provides the framework, policies, and guidelines to ensure that service provider activities are aligned with wider organizational needs. The service strategy will include areas such as criteria to support decision-making about which new services should be proceeded with. There are likely to be many opportunities for IT to help the business, but it will not have the resources or capabilities to do all of them. Guidance on purchasing decisions, for example, to buy hardware from strategic partners. guidance on achieving an appropriate balance where there are two or more conflicting objectives. For example, balancing the need to limit the cost of deploying a new service with the need to ensure a non-disruptive deployment. Strategy is very much concerned with longer-term purposes. It's concerned to ensure that decisions made today are consistent with wider aspirations and objectives. It does this by defining the longer-term objectives and then determining how those objectives will be achieved. Finally, it specifies how it will know if the objectives have been achieved. Let's think for a moment about what happens if an organization has no strategy. Think back to the 1980s, when the mainframe was still king, but client-server computing was hot on its heels. In fact, over the next decade, the client-server paradigm triumphed, with huge numbers of servers and desktop computers being installed. In some organizations, the commissioning of a new server was almost a daily occurrence. In many organizations, this massive change took place in an unplanned, piecemeal fashion. There was no organizing strategy. This meant that decisions about what hardware to buy, for example, were made on a tactical, case-by-case basis. The end result was infrastructure composed of servers of a variety of makes and models, running a number of different operating systems and supporting various database management systems. In other words, an infrastructure that was costly, complex, and difficult to support. These organizations then spent several years standardizing and consolidating. I guess a simple way of putting it is that if you don't think now about where you want to be in 5 years' time, don't be surprised if you find yourself in a place you don't want to be. The objectives of strategy management include: identify opportunities that will benefit the organization as a whole by analyzing the internal and external environment, to identify and mitigate constraints affecting the organization or the service provider, and to ensure the continuing relevance of the service provider's vision and mission. Other objectives of strategy management are: to establish the position of the provider in relation to its customers and competitors, for example, by determining what services to offer and how to develop distinctive offerings. To ensure that strategies are translated into action. Let's be clear what we mean by this. We do not mean that strategy management executes strategy. That is a line management responsibility. But decision makers and planners of all kinds within the service provider need up-to-date knowledge of the provider's strategies. That knowledge is provided by strategy management in the form of up-to-date strategy documents. Strategy management also ensures that strategic plans are incorporated into tactical and operational plans, and to ensure that strategies continue to meet the changing needs of the business. Strategies may exist at more than one level within an organization. The organization itself must have a strategy that provides vision, guidance, and direction for the whole organization. Individual business units will also have strategies that will help each unit to achieve the overarching strategy of the organization. The structure and culture of the organization will determine the complexity of this strategic landscape. So, an IT service strategy exists within a wider strategic context. Strategy management for IT services is concerned only with IT service strategy, which is one aspect of a wider IT strategy. Of course, if the organization is a commercial provider of IT services, then the business strategy will encompass many of the concerns of an IT strategy. The diagram on the screen illustrates the relationship of the various organizational strategies. The business strategy addresses questions such as: what are the objectives of the organization? How will we achieve those objectives? And what services and products will we offer? The IT strategy is concerned with: what business outcomes must we support? What IT services will we offer? And how do we prioritize investments? Your study guide contains a version of this diagram that includes more detailed information about the possible contents of these strategies. This diagram illustrates how strategy is translated into tactical and operational activity. For example, The IT strategy will determine what services will be offered to customers, while the plans for developing them are at the tactical level. The delivery of live services is an operational activity. The diagram also shows the relationships between the business and IT at the strategic, tactical, and operational levels. These relationships are quite complex. The business strategy must take into account the existing strategies of IT and other business units. Those strategies form some of the constraints that corporate strategists must work within. IT strategy is primarily determined by the business strategy, but it must also take account of business tactics. For example, if a business unit must comply with a legal or regulatory requirement, then the IT strategy must support that. The arrows between the business and IT domains also indicate places where activities and plans must be coordinated to ensure consistency. Your study guide contains a version of this diagram that includes more detailed information about the possible contents of these strategies. At this point, let's clarify that a service strategy is not the same as a service management strategy. A service strategy is the strategy that a service provider will follow to define and execute services that meet a customer's business objectives. For an IT service provider, the service strategy is a subset of the IT strategy. An IT service management strategy is the plan for identifying, implementing, and executing the processes used to manage services identified in a service strategy. In an IT service provider, the ITSM strategy will be a subset of the service strategy. You will see from this definition that an IT service management strategy is a plan rather than a strategy. Strategy management for IT services provides a number of benefits for both the service provider and the wider organization. It will engage with business to agree a direction for IT. This enables the business to make clear its objectives and priorities. It will allow IT to assess demand for new services in the context of an agreed strategy and reject requests that do not align with wider aims of the business. The alternative is for IT to respond to the business unit with the biggest checkbook or most political muscle. The process will reduce costs by ensuring that investments in new services are only made where there is an agreed, recognized benefit. Other benefits from the strategy management process are shown here. The service provider will be able to link proposals for investment in IT to business objectives, which tend to increase levels of investment. And the process will maintain close contact with the business and realign the strategy as necessary. This means that new business priorities will be recognized and resources redeployed accordingly. We should remember, of course, that a strategy is there to help the service provider and the customer. Sometimes a proposal will not fit within the strategy, and yet it may make good sense. When this happens, the service provider and the business should review the strategy and either reject the proposal or modify the strategy. Okay, we've looked at the purpose, scope, and value of the strategy management for IT services process. Now let's consider its relationship with some other processes. Strategy management influences activity across the whole service lifecycle. But on this course, we are only interested in its influence on the SOA processes of service strategy. Service portfolio management, financial management for IT services, demand management, and business relationship management. Let's take a look at those key interfaces, starting with service portfolio management. Strategy management sets the boundaries within which service portfolio management works. It defines what types of service should and should not be offered, and sets the criteria used to make judgments about individual cases. It also sets financial objectives related to levels of investment and required returns. In the case of external service providers, it defines the market space and customers that new services should target. Strategy management needs the help of financial management and its tools and knowledge to define the return required from investments that will meet wider organizational financial objectives. and it determines the financial objectives of the service provider that will enable it to contribute to the financial objectives of the organization. Strategy management supports demand management by identifying the key business outcomes that IT services must support and the relevant business activities. Demand management uses this to define patterns of business activity and user profiles. Strategy management supports business relationship management by identifying and clarifying how IT supports the business both now and into the future. We're going to complete this lesson with a case study exercise. Make sure you've printed off the case study and read it carefully, as it will help to provide focus during the course. You'll also find using the case study now supports you when you deal with the scenarios in your sample and final exams. Plan to spend 25 minutes on this exercise. You've joined Ceylon Ordnance as a new employee. Your role includes service improvement, as well as building a relationship with the business. Prepare a presentation for the business management team, highlighting the role of service management in Ceylon Ordnance and why it's important, where you feel improvements need to be made, and where you propose to start. What is the highest priority? Good luck! And remember, you can contact the tutor team if you have any questions. Before we complete this lesson, here's a quick quiz to test what you've learned. At the end of the quiz, you'll receive your result and can try the questions again if you would like to.